I'm about to show you the quick summary of the popular narrative of McCarthyism. I hope you'll notice all of the parallels that apply to modern Democrats and their political strategies they employ when accusing their opposition of being Nazis, Nazi sympathizers, racists, transphobes, white supremacists, and the like. As we're about to learn, elements of McCarthyism include accusing people based on past associations, aspects of their private lives, thousands losing their jobs and having their names dragged through the mud, a toxic mixture of character assassination, accusations made without evidence, and a reliance on gossip to ruin people that are perceived to be a threat. A master of utilizing the media obsessed with headlines and attention, moving from one fabrication to the next faster than they can be refuted.
For 5 years, Senator Joesph McCarthy was one of the most influential politicians in America, based primarily on his assurances to the public that there was a vast communist conspiracy to undermine the American way of life, that spies had infiltrated even the highest levels of government, and that only he was brave enough and smart enough to stop them. What most people didn't realize at the time, however, was that this was a reputation built entirely on lies. His investigations produced little evidence of espionage, instead accusing people based on past associations, family histories, or aspects of their private lives. Thousands lost their jobs or had their names dragged through the mud, most of whom were apparently loyal Americans who had done nothing wrong. It has become known as McCarthyism, a toxic mixture of character assassination, accusations made without evidence, and reliance on gossip to ruin people perceived as a threat. For McCarthy, this extended to anyone that opposed him on anything. His political enemies were subjected to insults, ridicule, and allegations that they were part of the communist plot. He was a master of utilizing the media, obsessed with headlines and attention, moving from one fabrication to the next faster than they could be refuted. Even many members of his own party eventually became fed up with him and worked together with their opposition to bring him down. But the legacy of Joe McCarthy has a long reach, and the country is still feeling its effects today.
Now I want you to feel the popular emotion that's attached to the quote, "Have you no sense of decency, sir?" during the McCarthyism hearing that absolutely ended his career. And I don't want to give away the game and foreshadow the end of the video, but you might feel differently about this moment if you make it to the end.
May we not drop this? I did you, I think, no personal injury, Mr. Cohn.
No, sir.
And if I did, I beg your pardon. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
The fact that McCarthy really didn't seem to have any sense of decency, and the fact that he'd been caught publicly in lies over the course of these 6 weeks, the public's capacity to trust him, the belief that he was engaged in this anti-communist crusade as some sort of earnest attempt to protect American society.
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden is the best Biden ever.
She knows so long as she was 9.
In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been.
Now, this age attack, this obsession by the right,
Joe Biden may not be able to speak for himself the way that he used to.
They want to think to take on government if we get out of line, which they're talking again about, and that's him lying around.
I think people should be speaking up for Joe Biden.
Further today is Hirsch Goldberg Poland is still. He is not here with us, but he's still being held by Hamas.
But a huge part of the Mueller report talks about Russian disinformation tactics. And one of the themes this election cycle is that Joe Biden is too old to lead. And so everyone is seizing upon this. And it is a classic disinformation tactic. And I think the best thing that we can do is to prepare the American people for this false narrative.
A sharp turn for history. As President Biden announced at 1:46 p.m., there would be no last campaign for him. I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term.
Remember how everyone on the left was denying President Biden's cognitive decline as the right wing was screaming about it for years? I mean, jokes about his dying brain happened 5 years ago while he was running for president. August 30th of 2019. Breaking, Joe Biden drops out of the presidential race after being told that he's in the presidential race. Biden was called out on national TV
I also want to close with one message to the Democrat Party. End this farce that Joe Biden is going to be your nominee. We know he's not even the president of the United States. He's a puppet for the managerial class. So have the guts to step up and be honest about who you're actually going to put up so we can have an honest debate. Biden should step aside, end his candidacy now.
The New York Times, how Biden's stumbles collided with a right-wing conspiracy theory. Some far-right commentators have long argued that Democratic Party elites were plotting to replace President Biden. Now those commentators say they'll be proved correct. 8 months after being called out on the national stage, Joe Biden posts on social media, "Let me say this as clear as I can. I'm the sitting president of the United States. I'm the nominee of the Democratic Party. I'm staying in the race." 8 days later, Trump, at his rally, narrowly survived an assassination attempt, but one of his supporters was killed in the gunfire. The Secret Service unequivocally let this happen. 4 days later, Biden got COVID and completely disappeared for another 4 days. An unofficial document was released on his personal social media declaring he will not be running for re-election. Think of how maddening it is to say what's going to happen. The Democrats do exactly that, then completely ignore how you were correct the entire time. Look at all the evidence you have, and how they just don't care. Now imagine being Senator Joesph McCarthy in 1954, calling out the world's strongest military for having communist infiltration, armed with no internet, and at best, newspaper clippings. Are you really going to trust these same liars to tell you an accurate story about McCarthyism? The man walked so you could run. How you feel about what's happening now? McCarthy felt it on steroids then. It's about time I peel the curtain back and show you, definitively, how what you've been told about McCarthyism is a delusion. I see McCarthyism both as a reaction to him seeing communist infiltration in our most powerful institutions, and an expression of his frustration over this long-standing issue. Just like when Pew Research found that during the worst race riots we've ever had, especially during a pandemic, Americans saw the protests as both a reaction to Floyd's death and an expression of frustration over long-standing issues. I assure you, as unethical as McCarthy was, he caused much less destruction in society than BLM and therefore deserves the same level of rationale. But what do I know? Let's listen to what the experts say. Let's listen to what the historian says about McCarthyism.
Hi, this is Yahuwah Williams. I'm a historian, and here's what you need to know in order to sound smart about Joesph McCarthy. During the 1940s and 1950s, many Americans worried about the prospects of communism rearing its head within the United States. Republican Senator Joesph McCarthy from Wisconsin was one of the key political figures to capitalize on these fears.
Was he capitalizing on these fears? Or was he trying to warn the American public? Continue.
It's not until McCarthy turned his attention to the United States Army in 1954 that his reign of terror came to an end, and he was censured by the United States Senate.
So the popular narrative is that McCarthy really messed up when he went after the Army.
It was his investigation of the Army that finally turned public opinion against him and diminished his power.
What a lot of these historians seem to leave out is that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were convicted of espionage in 1951, and they were executed by the federal government in 1953, becoming the first American civilians to be executed for such charges and the first to be executed during peacetime. They were spying for the Soviet Union and provided top-secret information about American radar, sonar, jet propulsion engines, and nuclear weapon designs. So, it wasn't like they were communists. Boy, they're communists. They married in 1939, of course, after meeting each other at the Young Communist League in 1936. But they're a couple of dumb kids in love. You can't hold that against them that they got affiliated with this group. I mean, it wasn't like Julius was like a leader or anything in the Communist Party. Julius became a leader in the Young Communist League. In 1939, he graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. Okay, well, McCarthy was going after the Army, so I don't see what this has to... Julius Rosenberg joined the Army in 1940, where he worked as an engineer inspector until 1945. He was discharged when the Army discovered his previous membership in the Communist Party. You know the movie Oppenheimer? About the physicists that worked on the top-secret Manhattan Project? They spent years developing and designing the atomic bomb. and how their work came to fruition on July 16, 1945, as they witnessed the world's first nuclear explosion forever changing the course of history. Those are the secrets that he gave to the Soviets.
One of the most persistent images of the Cold War is that of the spy. Through bouts of paranoia, like that stirred up by McCarthyism.
Bouts of paranoia stirred up by McCarthyism. It was the first nuclear bomb. He was a communist. He shared secrets to Soviet Russia. We thought that was such a bad thing that we executed him in 1953. But go ahead, let's hear how the story is normally told.
Julius was a US Army engineer working at a lab during the Second World War in 1940. But not just any lab, the engineering lab in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Here, a lot of sensitive and critical technologies were being worked on by the Army's best engineers, including guided missile control and radar. He was, however, eventually fired from his position in 1945 for having previously been a member of the Communist Party. During the time he was there, however, he managed to smuggle classified information to the Soviets via radio. He also recruited more agents into the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, or NKVD, or Stalin's Secret Police and Intelligence, whichever you prefer. Under Rosenberg's direction, secret plans for things like jet engines, and yes, even information on the Manhattan Project, was snuck to the USSR.
We all know that classic trope of communists being lone wolves, right? We killed the two communists involved with sharing secrets about the first atomic bomb with the Soviets. What are you so paranoid about? Obviously, McCarthy brought up the execution of the Rosenbergs in his hearings, right? He's calling out the army. There was a communist in your army. You kicked him out because he was a communist. He gave secrets about the first nuclear bomb to the Soviet Union. I mean, McCarthy's lawyer was the same lawyer that got them the death sentence.
They were eventually convicted of espionage and sentenced to death. Roy Cohn, the same Roy Cohn who was also the infamous lawyer for Joesph McCarthy, is noted as the person who specifically pushed for the death penalty.
I can't find any record of the Rosenberg's execution being mentioned in the McCarthy hearings. Here's all I do know.
In an infamous exchange during those televised hearings, in which McCarthy attacked a young Army officer, the Army's chief counsel thundered at the senator, "Have you no sense of decency, sir?" which encapsulated the turn against McCarthy in this period.
That's a lie. What led to this nail-in-the-coffin career-ending quote to Joesph McCarthy had nothing to do with him attacking an Army officer. The opposing defense lawyer, Joe Welch, cut a deal with McCarthy. Since McCarthy's lawyer, Roy Cohn, had dodged the draft, McCarthy had to promise to not bring up Fred Fisher. I'm gonna show you who Fred Fisher was and what organization he was connected to. But first, let's hear the narrative and then I will correct it.
The television moment of the Army-McCarthy hearings that is lived in memory ever since is the famous moment on June 9th, 1954, when McCarthy decides to violate an agreement that Cohn and Welch had come to before the hearings.
Roy Cohn, although of perfect draft age, had managed to avoid the Korean War and the draft afterwards. It was kind of astonishing. Joe Welch said, "Fine, I will never bring up your draft status, but we have a problem of our own. We have a young attorney named Fred Fisher, who was a member of a communist front group while he was at Harvard Law School, and we brought him down to work on the committee. We decided that because of his past, we would send him home, and I would appreciate it if you would never bring up Fred Fisher."
So in the age of no internet, McCarthy is coerced into agreeing that he won't bring up Fred Fisher, a former member of a communist front group in law school, or else the defense attorney for the Army would tell everyone that McCarthy's lawyer dodged the draft. McCarthy's lawyer dodging the draft has nothing to do with communist infiltration in our country. I would say that's a pretty dirty thing to do when you're defending the Army against apparently invalid accusations of communist infiltration. So to recap so far, a year before this trial, we executed communists for sending secrets of the first nuclear bomb to the Soviets. A year after that, an Army defense lawyer is coercing McCarthy to not bring up communist ties to one of his lawyers. A lawyer, by the way, 6 weeks before the hearing, Joe Welch dismissed him because of his ties with the National Lawyers Guild. Joe Welch revealed he had confirmed Fisher's former membership in the National Lawyers Guild approximately 6 weeks before the hearing started. After Fisher admitted his membership in the National Lawyers Guild, Welch decided to send Fisher back to Boston. The National Lawyers Guild represented Ethel and Julius Rosenberg and many other victims of government-led anti-communist witch hunts of those times. The Guild filed briefs in opposition to the deportation of aliens or denial of citizenship based on political beliefs. That sounds nice, but if your political belief is communism, then you can't believe existing in harmony, and your sole movement is to take down capitalism. I would say that perhaps that's a disqualifying political belief in the United States. Now, just because the National Lawyers Guild defends people against communist accusations and wants to keep illegal aliens in the country that can have whatever political opinions they want, that doesn't mean they're communist. They were formed in 1937, a progressive and racially integrated group, and some of its members belonged to the Communist Party. Okay, fine, some of the founding members belong to the Communist Party. The group declares itself to be dedicated to the need for basic and progressive change in the structure of our political and economic system. Okay, well, to the end that human rights shall be regarded as more sacred than property interests. Interesting. Not quite communist. Think of the hoops I have to jump through to try and prove that something is communist to you, when nowadays AOC can just call Trump a neo-Nazi with no proof whatsoever.
Donald Trump is also very old and a racist and a neo-Nazi.
Continuing, according to a historian, the National Lawyers Guild was allied with the Communist Party in the 1930s, with a significant number of NLG founders having been members or fellow travelers of the Communist Party, including Reimer and Joesph Brodsky. In 1936, Mortimer Reimer, a Communist Party member, was invited to form the National Lawyers Guild, a national association of American lawyers which will be a truly progressive force in the life of the nation. Joesph Brodsky was general counsel of the International Labor Defense, an affiliate or arm of the Communist Party of the United States. In 1937, Ferdinand Pecora was a founding member of the NLG. Pecora had to resign from the NLG during its third annual convention in 1939 after the vote against his resolution disavowing communists failed to carry in the national vote. So he wanted the NLG to disavow communism, then he had to resign because he supported the resolution to disavow communists. Now that we've determined that the National Lawyers Guild has been feverishly communist since the mid-30s, let's continue to present day in 1954.
I work for the committee here. They know how we go about handling situations of communist infiltration and failure to act on FBI information about communist infiltration. And may I add my small voice, sir, and say whenever you know about a subversive or a communist or a spy, please hurry. Will you remember those words? Mr.
But
Welch,
McCarthy
sir,
gets so
with
angry at Welch's badgering of Roy Cohn that he blurts out the name of Fred Fisher.
Yeah, the defense lawyer for the Army with accusations of communist infiltration within the Army. That defense lawyer is knowingly hiding communist ties to the National Lawyers Guild and doing nothing short of blackmailing McCarthy. He's holding the fact that McCarthy's lawyer is a draft dodger over his head, so he can't bring up the actual communist infiltration with the National Lawyers Guild. And since the defense lawyer, Joe Welch, has that in his back pocket that he can't say anything, in the most smug way possible, he's like, "Can I add my small voice?"
And may I add my small voice, sir?
You run along and let me know if you have the names of any communists.
And say whenever you know about a subversive or a communist or a spy, please hurry. Will you remember those words?
And McCarthy goes, through our agreement, you know that there's communists. You're defending the Army. I'm gonna say this name and violate our agreement. Yeah, I would say that's more than reasonable. Even if Joe Welch wasn't being smarmy, even without that, McCarthy would be completely within his right for his country to bring up the communist infiltration that he knows this guy is hiding.
Blurts out the name of Fred Fisher.
In view of Mr. Welch's request, I think we should tell him that he has in his law firm a young man named Fisher, who has been for a number of years a member of an organization which was named, years and years ago, as the legal bulwark of the Communist Party. And I have hesitated bringing that up, but I have been rather bored with your phony request to Mr. Cohn here.
Little did I dream you could be so reckless and so cruel as to do an injury to that lad.
How could Joesph McCarthy be so cruel? And he wasn't supposed to bring it up, but how could he bring up somebody from a communist organization? How could you be so cruel to this young lad and bring up the entire point why we're here, which is communist infiltration? In the army, sure, but we can't even start anywhere. So this is why I assume he also wasn't allowed to bring up the only civilian during peacetime to be executed for espionage. The army can't handle that they had a communist in the army. They don't want anyone to know that. Then Joe Welch, the defense lawyer for the army, is like, please don't bring up the guy from the communist organization. And he has no argument, and he just acts indignant. He acts like Greta Thunberg. He's straight up is doing the how dare you defense.
It is, I regret to say, equally true that I fear he shall always bear a scar needlessly inflicted by you.
You made a promise to not talk about the lawyer at my firm that was a part of a communist front.
I want to say, Mr. Welch, that it has been labeled long before he became a member, as early as 1944.
So, McCarthy, masterfully, using Fred Fisher as a conduit to talk about the National Lawyers Guild and talk about their communist infiltration. Finally, can we start talking about the communist infiltration in the country?
Senator, may we not drop this? I did you, I think, no personal injury, Mr. Cohn.
No, sir.
And if I did, I beg your pardon. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
You could see Joe McCarthy going, what did I do? What did I do? Joe Welch literally has a tear in his eye.
Oh, in an act of humanity, can you believe that McCarthy made the defense lawyer shed a single tear? What are the odds that that single tear was a lie?
This was seen as spontaneous. In fact, Welch had been thinking of this for months. Jim St. Clair, who was second in command to Joe Welch, said, we walked out the side door. The door closed behind us. He winked at me and said, how did I do? And they said, great, you did great.
The defense attorney for the army had been thinking about this for months. And this is about communist infiltration into the army. He shed a single tear, and then when walking out, he winked and said, how did I do? And they went, you did great. So this classic line of, have you no decency? He had no decency, and he cried crocodile tears to defend the communist infiltration of the United States military.
It was as if the entire country had been waiting for somebody to finally say this line, have you no sense of decency, that to Senator McCarthy. That's the moment where McCarthy incinerates himself on national TV. It's the moment in which the dragon that is Joesph McCarthy is finally slain.
There's something poetic about the defense lawyer for the military, Joe Welch, At the most famous part of the McCarthyism hearing, plotting months in advance to prey on people's humanity and cry to make McCarthy seem like a bad man, when Joe Welch cut a backroom deal to stop McCarthy from bringing up a communist organization Joe Welch's attorney, Fred Fisher, had been a part of. I guess I'm just left to wonder where he may have learned that from. So what happened to all of these subversive communists in the United States? Where did they all go? Where do you suppose the progressives went in society? How many progressives do you know and see nowadays? How would you spot communists nowadays? Well, for example, the most popular political streamer in the world, Hassan Piker, had a show in 2019 called Agitprop. Let's let him tell you about it.
What's going on, everybody? This is the second episode of Agitprop, short for agitative propaganda. We are live from the den of sin, the epicenter of cultural imperialism. Of course, I'm referring to sunny Los Angeles, California. I'm your host, Hassan Piker. So, let's get started. What is Agitprop? What is Agitprop, Hassan? Why did you name the show Agitprop? So, let's go to the first graphic here. Agitprop, abbreviated from Russian agitatsiya propaganda, agitation propaganda, is a political strategy in which the techniques of agitation and propaganda are used to influence and mobilize public opinion. Although the strategy is common, both the label and obsession with it were specific to the Marxism practiced by communists in the Soviet Union.
Okay, so Hassan's show is named after the Soviet-era Marxist-communist propaganda used to subvert capitalism and gain power. But I don't want you to go all Red Scare McCarthyism on me, okay? That doesn't mean he's communist. It's not like he's quoting Vladimir Lenin, jokingly using violence as a source of education.
But Lenin had some stuff to say about agitprop in What Is to Be Done in 1902. He said, struggle can also be transformed into agitation. Take the example of a picket line. Basically, it is a form of struggle, but it contains agitation, including slogans on the picket signs. Of course, the picket signs themselves can be transformed into a form of struggle when appropriately used to knock some scab or cop upside the head. And this, in turn, is a form of education for any fellow pigs and low-life scabs in the vicinity. Basically, the short and sweet of it is, there's a lot to be angry about.
Think of what you or a public figure have to do or say to be called a Nazi, white supremacist, authoritarian, or any other politically extreme label. This seems like an open and shut case, doesn't it? You can call Hassan Piker a communist, not even as a pejorative, but as an accurate political identifier by his own admission. So when you Google Hassan Piker communist, what do you think pops up? Because I mean, this is surely going to shape public opinion. Hassan Piker's political views have been identified as progressive, leftist, and democratic socialist. So remember the video I just showed you of Hassan Piker on his show Agitprop, and never forget that according to Google, that's a progressive, that's a leftist, that's a democratic socialist. According to Wikipedia, that's a left-wing political commentator. But this is the plan. They want you to be demoralized. So I guess the only thing we can do is the opposite of that. And the most logical thing I can think of is, by the power vested in me, I imbue you with the righteous indignation of Joesph McCarthy. His spirit lives in Donald Trump, not only by virtue, but of flesh. Because Roy Cohn, the prosecutor that got the death sentence for the communists spying for the Soviets, and was the prosecutor against the army in the McCarthy hearings, was one of the most influential mentors in Donald Trump's life.
Donald Trump had a fateful first meeting with a New York legend.
In a very down moment, Donald Trump went to a nightclub in Manhattan called Le Club, where he happened to meet Roy Cohn, who was famous for having defended Senator Joesph McCarthy back in the 1950s in the communist hunting days.
From McCarthy to the mobsters he represented, Roy Cohn was a battler. He was tough, often downright nasty, in court or on CNN's Crossfire.
I said that. According to a book I read.
Well, read another book. Cohn's message to Trump in that nightclub conversation, tell the government to, quote, go to hell.
In that very first meeting, Cohn laid out for him his philosophy of how to fight back in a lawsuit, how to fight back against a federal investigation, and that was to hit back 10 times harder.
In Roy Cohn, Trump found someone who loved risk, just like he did. And Cohn opened Trump's eyes to another idea, which Trump, of course, employs so well to this day, how to use the media to your advantage with the philosophy that any publicity is good publicity.
I don't want you to protest, I don't want you to riot, I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being, God damn it! My life has value! I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!"
I'm not gonna take it anymore! I'm mad as hell! I'm not gonna take it!
Then we'll figure out what to do about the depression and the inflation and the oil crisis. But first, get up out of your chairs, open the window, stick your head out and yell, and say, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna